What's up, y'all? Welcome to Better on the Inside, a podcast about working for a church without losing your soul. I am John Pyle. I am your host and digital pastor on this journey. And whether you work for a church, volunteer for a church, or just go to a church, or maybe you left a church or have been disconnected from a church, you're deconstructing your faith, you don't know what to believe, this podcast was designed for you. It's designed to help create cultures that are better on the inside, that make it simpler to follow Jesus and don't require so much of your soul, because it is so easy to serve a church, whether you're a volunteer, a staff member, somebody who goes there, a giver, a tither, whatever you want to call it. It is so easy to give more than you kind of receive back. And it can leave us feeling very dry from a spiritual perspective. And I don't want that to happen anymore. So that's why this podcast exists. And my guest today is somebody who runs a church like that. At least that's what it sounds like. And is somebody who speaks really well about the topic. And so she's somebody who not only speaks to church culture and what that can look like, she also allows us to look critically at what we're doing and the part that we play in it and how we can grow and be better. And so she's got some great spiritual knowledge that drops, and there are a couple kind of moments in this, and she has an opportunity, who I still haven't said who it is, I guess, to be able to show us a different way, imagine a different way. My guest is Mennonite pastor Melissa Florer-Bixler, and she is a speaker. She is an author. She has a book, How to Have an Enemy, and she's got some amazing articles that are online, and she's going to be speaking at Yale. That's an inside joke from a podcast, but she's going to be speaking at different places all around there, and she's in North Carolina. She's an awesome person. So you're going to want to check this episode out, and you're going to hear some of the ideas she has about decoupling some of what we've built at the church, some of the systems that we've put together, and retaining some of our humanity and some of our relationship, especially as we're navigating this pandemic. So I cannot wait for you guys to hear this episode. It is awesome. Check it out, and I'll see y'all later. Love you. Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to Better on the Inside. I am here with Melissa Florer-Bixler, somebody who I have really met for the first time here, but I've already given a nickname, the Notorious MFB. Melissa, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Any sort of 90s throwback, like anything that brings me closer to Biggie Smalls, closes the gap between me and Biggie is fine with me. So I'm doing especially well today. Thanks.
Basically the same thing. It was all a dream. It was all a dream.
That's right.
Fellow geriatric millennial, but Melissa is awesome. You tweet, you write, you're an author, you're a Mennonite pastor, a speaker, a social justice organizer. You have like commas and slashes all up in there. And I appreciate the stuff that you're writing because it's a little bit different. And so what's your latest book called? How to Have an Enemy, right?
How to Have an Enemy, Righteous Anger in the Work of Peace. Yep, out with Herald Press this year.
Wow. When did it come out?
August,
okay.
I think. Sounds about right. Okay. Yep, sometime in the summer.
Are you tired of saying that title?
No, I'm good with it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm really bad with titles of things. Like my sister actually was the one who landed on the one that the publisher liked, but I don't give my sermons titles. I'm really bad with lecture titles. It's like a word salad. And then I just kind of like try to figure out something to say.
And your sister comes in and goes, okay, this is the title.
Yeah, like my sister's my editor. She's like, those words don't make any sense.
Oh, well, that's a great title, though. By the way, shout out to your sister. What's your sister's name?
Heather. Yeah.
Heather.
Nice job, Heather.
I just assumed that her name was Heather Florer-Bixler, but I don't think that's true.
Yeah, just Bixler.
Yeah.
Yep. She's married, but kept the last name. So,
okay.
Yep.
Heather
Bixler.
Shout out to Heather Bixler. So what is because that is a great title, though, How to Have an Enemy, especially in an age such as this. So tell me a little bit more about the book and why you wrote it.
Yeah, for a long time, or in my Word documents, it's just called Enemy Book, because that was really, where this sort of like every book, everything I write, I think comes from a question that I have, and then I don't really presume that anybody has the same questions as me, but if you are, perhaps you want to think about this particular question alongside of me. And the question that I was thinking about over the past couple of years, as I think a lot of us were, was how do I love my enemy? And the question before that, who is my enemy, who I'm called to love? We spend a lot more time on that first question, how do I love my enemy? But there's an assumption there that we know who our enemies are. And that seems to be a place where I think there's a lot more discomfort in Anabaptism and in the Peace Church tradition. But I think generally speaking for people in the church, but we really came across this political moment of Trumpism in our country where it felt like, I think we really did experience a much more sort of clear set of conflicts rising up. And so really feeling the need to address that for myself within Scripture and within the tradition of our faith.
Yeah, that is so cool and so necessary. Because as you, what's the word? Diplomatically, there we go. I was trying to find my words. I just watched a terrible movie and I'm still mad about it. But as you diplomatically put it, I love this piece of the political moment has created so much conflict and there's so much talk about both sides, right? There's a lot of like, polarization, sidism of like, well, both sides. And I think the spineless kind of way to take that on is just like, well, there's good people on both sides and we have to listen to both sides of the argument. And you're coming from a much different perspective of how do I have an enemy? Somebody that I disagree with and not going, well, compromise, but instead going, this is how I have an enemy and this is how I love that enemy.
Yeah. And I do feel like I was looking for somebody to have this conversation with me, right? Like I needed to figure this out. And what I kept getting was exactly what you're talking about. Well, like, let's really celebrate these churches where Democrats and Republicans come together and this sort of using this language of left, right, and center to avoid talking about the things that we really needed to talk about, which were that people's lives were materially impacted by the political decisions we made, by where we aligned ourselves.
Yeah.
And really that oftentimes these political categories are used to obfuscate actual like people's actual lives.
Right. Oh man, the way you said that just got me so excited. Of just the decisions we make material impact people's lives. And I think in this rush to be non-political, right? And there's a definite focus in evangelical circles, especially in mega churches. Some have gone the way of just like, hey, we're putting an American flag in the sanctuary and we're having a 21 gun salute as we pray. And we're backing very specific people. Like they've made a very clear choice in the political piece. Most places tend to kind of sit in this, I don't know, lukewarm middle of like, hey, we have Republicans and Democrats that give, and we just want to kind of be in this spot. And there's an obsession with being apolitical. And what I think would be better language is maybe nonpartisan, because what you're talking about is the impact on actual people's lives. And if you don't have and I'm not saying you have to have a take, but if you don't weigh in on actual issues that affect people, you are supporting the status quo, and the status quo is not in favor of the people that the church should be for. Is that a fair assessment of what that looks like?
Yeah, because everything is political, right? There's literally nothing in our lives that isn't like in the sort of traditional like way we think, not about, like you're saying, not about partisan politics, federal politics, even local politics, but where you send your kids to school is a political decision, right? Where you shop for your food is a political decision. Whether you call the police or not, when there's a break-in at the church, you are making, because of all a polis is right, people who have made collective decisions about their lives.
Yeah.
And here we are as the church, of people who are called to a particular form of life, making particular decisions about our world. And there's no way to pull ourselves out of the way that that intersects with political decisions that we think of more traditionally. But I think that the question is, where do we, what's the imagination that we have cultivated as a church that puts us both in a non-competitive relationship, right, with political things that happen at school boards and election commissions, and at the same time doesn't put our hope in those things, right? That puts our hope in the good news of Jesus Christ, which is always going to challenge the powers of this world in whatever form that they take.
Oh, that is so true, right? He's bringing good news for the poor and the captives, and he's giving the blind sight. So it's going to be in opposition to a lot of these things. And I get so excited when you talk about this, but where we have our churches is a political decision. Yes. Where you go to church is a political decision that you make, and so on and so on. And so in this rush to be apolitical, we're definitely supporting something. And so as churches, we have these kind of megachurch, and you come from a different tradition. And so I love talking about your what did you call it? Oh, I have it right here. My church is a pointless waste of money. Is that? Oh, my church is a beautiful waste of money. Yes. Pointless is terrible. Sorry. My church is a beautiful waste of money.
But it's certainly beautiful.
Right. And so you're kind of on a different side where you've got this, I talk a lot about differentiating between the 501c3 organization and the spiritual community. And based on what I know of your church, it leans way more to the spiritual community part than the 501c3 organization. And so it could seem like maybe it's at odds with the megachurch, but I think there's a lot you can teach us about how to elevate the spiritual community over the 501c3 organization and what that looks like. What are some of the lessons that you've learned in pastoring kind of a different kind of church than somebody who's usually on a podcast?
Yeah. I think about what, in terms of these decisions, that even sort of how this church, that Raleigh Mennonite Church that I pastor, developed. And there's another church, Chapel Hill Mennonite, that's about 20 miles down the road from us. And it started as a small group from Raleigh Mennonite. And there's this sort of famous story that the reason that Chapel Hill Mennonite became a church is because there weren't enough spoons. They were eating at somebody's house, and the group got big enough that there weren't enough spoons anymore. And so, maybe we need to buy our own spoons. And if we're going to buy our own spoons, like to accommodate this group of people that's grown to the size, maybe we should just start worshiping together on Sundays. And so even just sort of that it's like, we bless you on your way. We want this, we want you to meet here. And then, when we think about the size of our congregation, just probably between 60 and 80 people on a Sunday, really think like we can't get any larger than can accommodate our decision-making process, which is a consensus decision process. Everybody's involved in the decisions that we make as a congregation, and we have to reach consensus in order to move ahead with the decision.
Okay, this is an audio medium for most people. I just made a face of like, what? Like, that sounds frightening, terrifying, wonderful, all at the same time.
Yeah, it is all of those things. But it is sustainable because of the form of church life. It is intertwined with who we are as a spiritual community, right? Like because we are small enough that we cannot help but know one another, right? Like there's no getting out of like being up in each other's business when there's only 60 to 80 people at church at a time, right? And once we're too big to be up in each other's business, we probably need another church someplace else. Because without without being held and known and accountable to one another, it becomes very easy to say, oh, well, I just don't like that idea. I'm going to vote against it. Right. But if I have to show up at your house to babysit your kids tomorrow, I'm going to think about the decisions that we make after worship differently, right? Like if we're going to sing in this small group together and have to rehearse together for weeks and weeks, that means something about the decisions that we make together as a church, in our money and what we do with our time, where we worship, because we're permanent renters. All of that is all of that's together, right? Like there's no separation between the structure of church, how we worship, the decisions we make.
Yeah, which is incredible because there's accountability in relationships. Right. And so it's much closer to the idea of family where it's like, well, you're not firing people. Like I'm thinking in your church context, and it sounds ridiculous, but in mega churches, it's like there's performance, focus, and there's this program should be like this, and you achieve the X, Y, or Z. But and people talk about church being family, but in your context, it's literally like, well, when Aunt Sally brings a bad casserole, you don't go, hey, you can't come to Thanksgiving next year. We're going to replace you with somebody who makes better casseroles. There's a chef that's down the street in Austin that's got this amazing restaurant. So we're going to go ahead and bring her in for casseroles. You don't do that. It's the accountability and relationship, because it is hard to have, I don't know, dumb conflict. Let me just call it dumb conflict or low level conflict with people that you actually love and care for.
Right. And I mean, even when you use that example, like a real example of this is the church that called me into ministry, Portland Mennonite. We would do a prelude before worship. And one of the people who did a violin prelude was this woman, Emily, who had, taken violin since she was 4 years old, was a performance major in college. Yeah. And then we had this other guy, Ben, who started playing the violin.
Oh, Ben! I love Ben already.
Ben, who started playing violin like when he was 50. And I think he was 65. And he was not good, John. He was not good. But he took up the violin when he was 50. Who does that? Right? Like,
it's incredible.
I am going to watch Netflix 24 hours a day in my free time when I'm 50. I'm not going to be learning to play the violin. And to be able to honor this gift that he had cultivated, like in this really profound way, even though he was nowhere and never would be in the place that Emily was in her playing. But to be able to offer this gift and to invite us into this learning and growing and just this real persistence of being a learner late in life of an instrument. That was also a gift. That was beautiful to us and to God's ears. And I'm really grateful for Ben.
Yeah, I'm grateful for Ben too. What an amazing story. I loved him already. But taking up anything when you're 50, as somebody who is rapidly approaching 50, right? As a geriatric millennial, taking up something new and the humility of learning something. Most people, when they're getting closer to 50, are just like, look, this is what I know. I'm going to stick to the hits. It's like a band that you go see that understands why they're there. We're going to play stuff off the first and second album. We're not going to play the new stuff. You don't want to hear it. But to your point, from God's perspective, those things there's not one that's above the other, right? The performance quality doesn't determine the value. And so this is a theme that arises in a lot of the stuff that I've read of yours of we are not what we produce. That's not our value. Talk a little bit about that ethos of the idea of moving away from our value in our production.
Yeah. I remember Barbara Brown Taylor once talked about how we need a green letter Bible where all the times Jesus talks about money are highlighted, and then like 90% of the Bible would be highlighted green. Because it is this topic that Jesus talks about so persistently. And I think that the reason for that, or I've come to understand why Jesus is so insistent upon that, is because whether it is capitalism today or the patron-client relationship of the ancient world, we live in these economic systems that reduce people to production, right? Like that's how these systems are formed. And it's so easy to try to translate this this happens all the time, right? Like how many books have I read about the CEO of like what we can learn from Starbucks about how to run our church? Like how, like here's an Instagram training session on how to market your church, right? Like, and so there's all these tools that that go into the church, and then it's really hard, I think, to again like imagine or do the work of interrogating what it is that we actually are also importing when we get CEO training for our lead pastors, right? Like, what is attached to that as it comes in our evaluation processes, in the sort of even in like the language of programming. Like we do not have programming at our church. There is no programming. You could get that elsewhere, right? Like that's just not right. We don't need like a Jesus-y version of the Enneagram workshop. Like if we were to get an Enneagram workshop, and what you learn can come in here and be a part of this. But it's just not the thing that we are called to do as the church, which is a worshiping community that activates worship in a lot of different places in our lives.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm letting that like sink in, because look, like I'm not a hypocrite here. I go to those conferences all the time. I read the books. I listen to the podcast. I'm fully in the mega church kind of world and have like my eyes on the CEO role. Let's be honest. Let's keep it 100% real. So I'm not like, oh, those people. No, that's me. Okay, that's me. One of the things but what you were talking about actually connects to something powerful that I was just reading Jesus talk about, of beware the yeast of the Pharisees. And you were talking about being careful of what you import with the good lessons of leadership, what you import with the efficient organization of the 501c3, what you import with certain financial strategies. Things don't come in a vacuum. And I think our society in general can kind of think in a modular way of, here, I'm taking this thing and it's just my iPhone. It doesn't have any ties to the world, how it's produced, the politics behind it, what finances it, what doesn't finance it. It just is what it is, because it's cleaner to think of it that way. And when we import some of the stuff you're talking about, some of this teaching, the yeast of the Pharisees was about, like, at least how I'm interpreting it, like Jesus is going, the bread may taste good, right? But beware that what's baked into it, what you get with it. And he's talking about their teaching very specifically. And so it made me think of that right away, right? And so we're embracing these teachings and we're going, yes, this is a great idea. And it might actually be a great idea. Like, it's not to poo-poo the things that are happening, but just to be, you talked about imagination and interrogation. These are two words that I'm like, I need to hold on to these words. You use great words, by the way. Imagination and interrogation are things that the church is lacking in some ways. And the interrogating of what is being imported, what is coming over with these concepts that we're embracing and these things that we're putting people towards. Even the idea of programmatic ministry. What is the yeast that you can't separate from the dough, that you can't separate from the product? Because once you've baked bread, you can't be like, I'm going to take the yeast out of it. You have kids, you know that sometimes you get a meal and the kids are like, but I don't want you'll get like a stir fry or a fried rice. And they're like, but I don't want the peas. And you're like, well, then you're going to be picking peas out of your fried rice. Like there's no way to get it out. It just comes with it that way. And that's a similar kind of thing that you're talking about, which is, it's so fascinating to consider that. like what comes over with that, and interrogating what that looks like. And so without like, without putting me and other people on blast, right? What are some of the things we're not interrogating that we've brought over with some of the culture and some of the things that we've embraced as a megachurch?
Yeah, and I think that's a good question, because I'll say I love bylaws. Like, I love church bylaws. Because they're an agreement, right? That's what bylaws are. They're an agreement, a public agreement that you've made with your church that you can point back to. Like, I don't think we need to go back. Like you're saying, a lot of these structural pieces are actually about health, right? And about sustaining and like, we need to have accountability structures for how we spend money in our churches, right? And there are a lot of people outside the church who can help us with those accountability structures in the church. So I don't think people who sort of come from church models like me want to see us, reduced to, do whatever you want, because all that does is it allows for power to assert itself in ways where there's no checks on it, right? Like, that's like really what one of the ways that I think maybe even answers this question is, like, are you using the structures you need to keep the powers, the power that happens in the pastoral role, in certain committees, in certain givers, to keep that in check? Like, do your systems help keep power in check? Or are they the kind of systems that allow for the people who are already in the places of power in our world, because of money, because of race, because of gender, because of class? Does it actually just replicate those power structures outside the church here? Because really, seems to be what Jesus wants from us, is to create a world that is sort of upside down, where the people who typically don't have voice find sanctuary, where the wealthy and the powerful become patrons of the poor, right? They want to be like, how do I live my life in such a way that the poor will welcome me into the kingdom of heaven? Like, right? Like, that's the parable of the shrewd manager right there. You better make friends with your money on this earth with the poor, because those are the people who are going to be in charge of whether or not you get into the eternal kingdom. According to Luke. So I wonder, how do we use the structures that we have, right? This unjust mammon, again, as that parable of the shrewd manager says, to attend to the ways that power is structured all around us, but in a way that sets people free. Because, right, this is the other thing we're talking about, is it's actually not good. Like, being wealthy is not good for wealthy people. It's not good
for you. Like, that's something that's absolutely underrated. It is not good for you because it does affect your soul.
That's right.
It 100%
It is not
does.
good. White supremacy is not good for white people or for people of color. Like, it is like we need to be liberated from these systems, right? We need acts of anti-violence to animate our churches. And there are all kinds of tools out there to help with that. But if we're just replicating the same world that's out here, that people are trying to find good news in the midst of, then that's the place where we really need to say, what am I offering that's any different than what Starbucks is offering or American Airlines, right? Like, right?
Come on. Yes. And at a budget, we do it worse.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
Oh man, the differentiation. Oh, that is so good. What are we offering that's different? And Jesus said a little thing, and I'm going to add a little footnote to your thing, just as not as a fact check, but as a support of among you, it will be different. It's almost like he said that and meant it. Do we think he meant that? Among you, it will be different, right? The people of this world, the rulers of this world, lorded over the people. And he's talking to his disciples, among you will be different. The least will be the greatest will be the least. And that it feels like you're taking that pretty
Right?
seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I would love for people who
Yeah.
work in corporate systems to look at their church and be like, that's ridiculous. Like, I can't believe like you're paying off
Yeah.
the student loans of people in your congregation instead of like building your endowment. Like, that's a
Yeah.
ridiculous use of money. And be like, okay,
It,
that seems like
it,
a good sign that what we're doing.
a good measure. Okay, it's a good measure. If it
Yes,
sems foolish
it is
to
a
the
good
world, it's a
measure.
good measure.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a really good point. I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a birthday party for one of my kids, and the kid's dad that was celebrating the party, his dad's a lawyer, and I always
Oh,
hesitate to tell people what I do because it either turns into confession time or they apologize for the swears that they've said and then they like
this is
run
true.
away from me.
This is true.
Some kind of, yeah, this guy was different. He's like, oh, hey, that's where the real money is. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, man, if you set this up right, man, let me tell you about what Joel Osteen is doing. And he starts going into how, and he's like, we need to start a church together, bro. And he starts going in because he's like, hey, man, you could, and he was talking about Kanye. He's like, hey, with Kanye, he's got a 501c3. You can't tax it, but he's making all this money because of this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness. Like, he saw the church as a better capitalist venture than
Yeah.
being a lawyer.
That's telling. Yep.
And when putting it in the like I've told that as a funny story because it is a funny story, but putting it in the context of what you're talking about now, it's heartbreaking. In that there's no different, it's not even that it's not the same. It's not even that it's a copy. It's that it's being used to be something that's
Right.
even more exploitative, that's even more loophole bound as a way to keep what you feel
Yeah.
like is rightfully yours.
Yeah.
And the thing that it's not just about the good of others. That's the thing that I think us as rich people, and if you've traveled and you know that if you live in America, even if you're poor here, you are often better off than folks in other places. So it's not, it's not talking about that. Well, I guess we could talk about what was it? The Broken Ladder. Did you read that book, The
I
Broken Ladder,
haven't.
about
Mm-mm.
inequality?
Yep.
Okay, it's interesting because the theory of the book, this
Sure.
is like I'm putting a pin in our conversation. The theory of the book is that the problem isn't actually how much money people
Sure.
have, it's inequality. And so it's like a
Right.
relative thing. So even if you have $1 million
Right.
and somebody has $1 billion,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the
Yep.
inequality. Anyway, back to the point. And so you were taking something that shouldn't make sense in a system of money first, me first, and when it makes sense with
Yep.
that, maybe we're not doing it right. Maybe there's something to be learned from how to change
Yeah.
the
And
church with
John,
that.
one of the things that reminds me of is I like what and I'm thinking about this because I'm giving another lecture. Oh my gosh, so many words must be written on the Great Resignation, like why pastors are leaving the church. And this reminds me of one of the things I'm going to talk about, which is how I feel like what we thought that we were getting into, I will pour out my spirit on all people. And actually what we are is we're in a marketplace of meaning making, right? Like we're actually
Ooh.
competing with CrossFit and the Enneagram and Kanye, right? Like we're all just in this. And so it's like, how can we make the most meaning here? And and so
Wow.
probably because of my personality, my general thought is like, I want people to be bored for at least 5 minutes of our worship service. Like I want every person to be like, this part is not actually my jam. Like at least once during every worship service, because it's actually not about you, right? Like I am not here. Like if you
Yeah.
want to feel like I want you to feel good and filled up and have meaning. And I want you to know that this is not a competition with those other things in your life. You can have all the meaning you want there, but this is actually a place where it's okay to be bored every once in a while, where it's okay to be quiet every once in a while, where the music is like, where all of our musicians are volunteers. And so we have this joke that like, I always pray that God doesn't send like 5 tuba players, because we would have only tuba worship in church. It'd be like, even that is like crossing a bridge for me. But like, we just literally work with whatever people come up. And so, you know what? I hear people all the time be like, oh, I would never go to a church without an organ. I'm like, well, guess what? You will never come to my church, because like, we don't got an organ. We don't even own a building. So if you're looking for a church that has like a certain type of music, our music is going to change next year when somebody else who plays the trombone comes in, right? Like, I want people to go to concerts and have amazing time worshiping at the altar of Sufjan Stevens. I worship at that altar on occasion as well, but that is not what worship is for. It is not for expertise. It is for the body gathered in the name of Jesus, remembered at the table as we become the body and blood of Jesus for the world. And there's lots of ways for us to help remind people that is the work that's been given for us to do.
Ooh, my goodness. That's going to be a good lecture.
I hope so.
Where are you doing that?
At Andover Newton, which is now at Yale. So it kind of looks like maybe I'm giving a lecture at Yale, even though I'm not. But I've told my mom that.
No, you're giving a lecture at Yale. Yeah. Between us? Like you're going full Rory Gilmore.
Yeah, me and my mom, it's at Yale. But for everybody else, it's actually Andover Newton, which is now at Yale. So
that is okay. So one, this will probably be released after you do that. Yeah. So just everybody listening to this right now is going to be like, oh man, that would have been a good lecture. Maybe the file will be available.
Yeah.
There's actually 3 things. 2, you're going to be at Yale. So that's a whole great thing. 3, shout out to Mrs. Bixler. What's your mom's name?
Robin, like the bird.
Robin Bixler, shout out. We're shouting out your whole family.
I know. I love them. They're so great.
What is your family like? How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I just have one sister and a mom and a dad who very grateful that they're both living. And they live they live in Durham, 25 miles from here. My sister lives down the street from them. So everybody's here. It's the best.
So Heather, Robin, and hold on. Heather, Robin, and Michael.
Nope. This is another classic, dad. It's a classic dad name.
Jim.
So close. Bill.
Oh, Bill Bixler.
Bill Bixler. Yep.
That's such the Incredible Hulk. No, that's Bill Bixby.
Yep. Close. So close. Yeah.
Oh, I was close.
Yeah, he's the Incredible Hulk of marriage and family therapy, though, for sure. Yep.
That's awesome.
Great. Yeah.
What a sweet. I've just learned a little bit about your family, and I appreciate that. It's a nice little snapshot in a chaotic, strange world. I have a whole picture of what your life potentially looks like with Bill, Robin, and Heather.
Yeah.
In North Carolina.
Just out here in North Carolina, just trying to survive the pandemic. That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah. That's what we're all doing. Okay. The thing that connected us most recently was you were tweeting a question of what have you seen in the pandemic that has changed the way you do church? Kind of asking some of the larger things. And one of the things that I shared that I feel is a thing, and it's a little bit of a statement that's kind of pithy, and so people get it, but it's people are defining their church by where they get their care, not their content.
Yeah.
And that has been something that's seared into my brain. And with that, the way that you're doing church is a little bit more like that. But talk a little bit more about what you learned from people kind of answering those questions and sorting through that.
Yeah. I was interested in how it did feel like there is a great unknown, right? People just feel wow, all the assumptions they had about church are no longer operative, and it doesn't feel like I really know what to expect,
Yeah.
right? And I think, part of that comes from the fact that we don't, it kind of feels like we're still in this in between, and maybe we will be forever, right? Like that's what I think is yeah. But I feel like one of the things that sort of kept coming up is kind of like in relation to what you're saying too, like I have this image of like an amoeba, like you're like this little part, like kind of like sucks off and then kind of comes back in, and it's like kind of this.
Yeah.
Whereas before you had like this structure, and there were either people who came on Sunday and people who didn't, and now it just feels like, oh, I need to reconnect with this community that I left years ago. But I also have the Quakers who I have been in a small group with. And so what does belonging look like, right? What does membership look like? What does, what does place look like when there is this sort of sense of community is sort of always morphing and changing shape. And people come and go, and then you have a consistent group that also just has to be porous, right? To people coming in and people going out. And I think we've always had that, but it feels like it's like, we were at like a 2, now we're like at a 10 with that reality.
Yeah. Yes. So pronounced. And you said the amoeba thing. I once wrote a paper in seminary about how the church is not an organization, it's an organism.
See? Yes. We're totally
the organism feels right, because it's like this shifting thing of, because we've really only done church like this for what, like 60 years, like the kind of more mega churchy kind of, it's like you can go back, however many years, nearly 2,000 years, and find, I don't know how many expressions and iterations of church and worship, and it all looks different, and it's always shifting. And that's where the church really has power. So many religious systems are built on, and I mean power in a good way, rigidity of like form, and rigidity of practice and liturgy, and like there's a rigid like, no, you can't change this, and the true believers are this, and then the church is just like a cockroach, just like, you can't get rid of us, like just morphing and changing no matter where it goes, and it is porous enough. What a great word! Such a good vocabulary. It's porous enough where things can come in and kind of be adopted, but things that aren't good can kind of pass through.
Yep.
And, we're still kind of passing through the Constantine, official religion of the empire. That's still passing through the organism. But we're kind of holding on to some other stuff. That's, what an exciting, it is, to your point, nobody knows what they're doing right now. And that's not just church world. I don't know that anybody knows what they're doing. Some people have decided to just put on a blindfold and drive and go, everything is fine, we're getting back to normal, and it doesn't matter what we crash into. Like, there are some people that are just living that way, and they're in charge of large things, some of those people. And then there are other people who still haven't left their bedroom, and they're just like tucked in there, and nobody knows what they're doing. We're all just doing the best that we can. Everybody's doing their best. And so it's interesting to live in an exciting but unknown period where there's not clear answers, where there's not, what do I do? Oh, well, shoot, you were asking about it. Again, this is so recent, and I promise I'm not stalking you. On Twitter, it's like we're sending our kids back to school without masks, right, in many places. So what does that mean when the teachers get sick? And what does that mean when this happens? And what does that mean? There's this chain reaction effect of we don't know what it looks like. And I will tell you, I didn't get a chance to tweet about it. In Texas, it ended up okay. We dropped the mask requirement a little while ago, but there were days that my 6-year-old in his first grade class was like, hey, Dad, there's only 4 other kids here. And it just was what it was. And it's like, okay. And I'm not saying it was right, but I am saying we did it and it was okay. And okay in the sense of, there wasn't a death at the school. There wasn't, like, I'm saying we got through it. Were more kids sick than probably needed to be, sure. But we're in the plowing through with the blindfold on in a lot of things here. I've been babbling for a little while, sorry. And so we don't know what's going on, but there's something exciting about that. Some personalities, it makes them be like, oh, I don't know what's going on, this is horrible. Others of us are a little bit like, it's the unknown. Let's try new things. Let's embrace new things. And I think some of the ethos of this podcast came from that, of going, we just can't do church the same way. I'm not smart enough to know what we should be doing. So why don't I talk to people? And dare I say, seek some of that consensus, right? I don't have to agree with everyone on it, but collective wisdom is better than mountaintop Moses coming down with the 10 Commandments. This is what we're doing. Kind of patriarchal style of leadership. Is that fair to say? Of we follow the guy in charge and he has all the answers. Or the woman in charge. I guess if you're,
next you turn around and there's Aaron with the golden calf. So, it's like following the one guy is like, doesn't always work out if you pick the wrong guy.
You were gone for so long. We needed something else to worship. Yeah. Well, so you can end up with, so we're in this exciting period. So I'm excited about it. Well, how are you feeling about it? How do you feel as somebody who's a thinker, as somebody who in some ways people are looking to for at least interesting explorations? They don't ask you to lecture, write books, or do things if you can't speak into something. How do you feel about this?
Yeah. I mean, one of these days, people are going to figure out I don't actually have that much to say, but they haven't yet. So until then, I'll just keep doing this. But yeah, I feel okay. I don't love, I kind of did like what we were doing before. Like I liked church and people came on Sundays. Okay. But I've also been opened up to the reality of who was left out of that. Right. And, wrote this piece about Zoom Church, which is the platform we use. And, recognizing that there were people LGBTQ people who didn't have access to churches where they felt like they were or were really isolated. And found, again, sanctuary. And so I think it's helped that there have been some gifts along the way to say, even in this discomfort, we have actually been enabled to become more faithful to who we want to be. It's not as if we're being forced to become something else. We are actually we've been a spotlight has been shown on the places where we have not been. The church that we want to be, that we have not been able to be good news in the way that we could be. And so thinking of it in that direction has been helpful, but I'm also in a very, very healthy church. And so I wonder if there's more anxiety for people who this whole thing has just been conflict and anxiety and frustration. It's really hard to have imagination when you are just bogged down in constant, entrenched conflict. And so that I think is my worry for pastors is that's so enervating, right? Like you can't live like that forever. And you've lived like that for 2 years.
Yeah.
And so how do you have hope when there are so many possibilities, but it's just so hard to live into those when the ticky tack stuff of every day is just,
Yeah, I mean, that's straight up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think a lot of people feel like they're surviving. And a lot of churches and pastors, and so connecting to your great resignation talk of why pastors are leaving, surviving stinks. I think you don't get into this to not use your imagination. You don't get into, church work, clergy work, whatever you want to call it, to just survive and to call people to just survive, right? We're calling people to thrive and we want to thrive. And can you do that in the current system as it is? I don't know. I really don't know. But to your point, it is a strain, an absolute strain. All right, I'm going to hard pivot on you. Are you ready for the segment that the world is talking about? The segment that has an amazing theme song that Garrett has either given us an amazing theme song or I get to sing it. Welcome to the non-judgment zone of joy. It's the non-judgment zone of joy. The non-judgment zone of joy. Pivot hard.
Oh, I wish we'd rehearsed that because I could have done some beatboxing behind that. And now
yeah. Well, we were making a joyful noise. I mean, we could try again if you want to jump in with the beatbox. Yeah. It's the non-judgment zone of joy. The non-judgment zone of joy.
Is that good?
Oh, you nailed it. It was
Yeah.
perfect. It was perfect. I think we worshiped
I love that for
together.
us and for the Holy Spirit.
That was awesome. Yeah. If you're interested in booking
we're
us, just
always
let us
available.
know.
Always.
Contact us.
24/7.
I love it because we can come to you virtually. So when you enter the non-judgment zone of joy, I just ask you, what is bringing you joy right now?
I, John, am in the first phase of a push-up challenge for myself. I challenged myself.
What?
And so I want to be able to do 50 push-ups in a month. And I love it. I love a short-term challenge and I get a lot of joy from it. Like I did a 5K with my 10-year-old a couple of months ago. Like I don't like to do things like long-term in physical fitness. I like a short-term goal. And it's just and you can just look forward to it every day. So the push-up challenge is what's giving me joy right now. Yep. It's what's giving me joy right now. Yep.
That, first of all, amazing. Second of all, this is not to be judgmental. I was like, you know what? When I see you, when I see your profile picture and all that, I'm like, I don't think that's a woman who could do a lot of push-ups.
You're correct.
Which is why the push-up challenge is great.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Follow-up question. Where are you in the push-up challenge right now?
I'm only on day 3. So I'm right at the beginning. And I also learned I've been doing push-ups wrong this whole time. I've had to watch a couple YouTube videos on form. And so I just want to encourage you, if you are sensing, listener, that you're doing a push-up wrong, there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of resources for you.
And you've sought it out.
I've sought out that help. I was not afraid to ask for help. And I am now, I'm now better for it.
Okay. I have so many questions about the push-up challenge, which is weird. What would you coach us on in form? What are the mistakes that people are making when doing their push-ups?
Yeah, so it's too far out or too far in. You have to really hit this zone just outside of your shoulders, where you're I'm not really great with angles, but it's not the 90 and not the not to the side, but kind of in the middle. So this is sort of, I know you can't really see this if you're listening, but
if you're listening,
what would you say that is? A 30-degree angle?
I'm so bad at geometry. If that's 90.
That's 90. Wouldn't that be 30?
No, this is not. Yeah. That sounds right. 30. Sure. Let's go 30. With it.
So you want to have your arms like that. Yeah. And it actually takes, but the part of the push-up challenge is that you have to do a lot of other exercises because push-up is the ultimate, that's everything. So you'd have to do some tricep training for a couple weeks. You have to do some core training because it's all the things. Push-up is really a very holistic exercise.
Oh, that's how many push-ups can you do right now?
4.
Okay. I mean, that's still good though.
Is it? Is it though?
Yeah. I don't think maybe we run a poll. I feel like most people, and I feel like most women specifically would struggle to do a push-up. I shouldn't say most. I should say I think a lot of people struggle to do a push-up.
Okay.
With the proper form.
Yeah, with the proper form, that may be true. It is hard. Well, it is actually hard.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times push-ups are sometimes easier because we stereotypically carry more upper body
Yep, that's right.
strength, right? And whereas women carry a little more in the
Yep.
legs. And so whenever we've done workouts at home, my wife can do wall sits forever,
Yeah.
and it makes me want to cry
Yes.
because I hate legs and whatnot. But like
Yep.
push-ups are, it's not that they're easy for me, because I don't know if you can tell. I don't know if you judged the shape that I was in. Like I apparently judged the shape that you were in. I'm not a super like fitness kind of dude.
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
but I could knock out a couple
Yeah.
push-ups.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
interesting. Has the proper form made it
No.
easier or harder?
No, I was definitely just doing what made it easier for me, which is further apart.
Okay,
Right. Yeah.
got
Yeah.
it. Because you have less distance to the ground.
It is
and you're
less
just like,
distance
bop,
to
bop,
the
bop, bop,
ground.
bop, bop.
Yep.
Okay,
That is absolutely true.
you're popping them
Yeah.
out.
And I think less tricep
Well,
as well. That's the other thing. So now I got to do them right.
I know it. Yeah. Well, because when you know better, you got to do better.
I feel that way. Some people do not feel that way, but that is a principle that I that I hold to.
That's like our whole job. When you know better, you got to do better. Like that's
like basically
the
what we
job
do
in a
for
summary.
living. Yes, and it extends to push-ups
Yeah.
apparently as well. So
Oh, there's a guy I know. This is, again, total random story. Andre Jennings, if you're listening to this, one of my dudes that I work with, he is the best bench presser because he's perfectly built for
oh
it.
yeah.
He's just a big, we joke that he's made out of the things that Wolverine are made out of, adamantium, because he's just super solid, but his arms aren't particularly long.
Oh.
And so he bench presses, and he's got a very broad chest. And so he bench presses, and it's just going 3 inches.
Yeah.
And different people are made for
That's right.
different things. So if you have long arms, push-ups might be harder. And if you have like a short, a thin or slight torso,
Slight torso. Yes.
might make it.
Yep.
Well, that is what is bringing you joy in the non-judgment zone of joy. Thank you for answering that question. And thank you for being on, Melissa. Melissa Florer-Bixler, Mennonite pastor, Yale lecturer.
Yes. Yale lecturer.
and-
That's right.
And congregational. Good job, Mom. Robin, be proud of your girl.
Podcast.
I love it. Thank you for joining us. What do you want to plug? What do you want to tell people? Where do people find you? How could they interact with you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah. Yes, I am on all the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can just look me up by my name. And
Yeah, there's not a lot of Melissa Florer-Bixlers.
I know there are none. I'm it so far.
The Notorious MFB.
POPPA. That's right.
Oh, no
that's
info
right.
for the DEA.
So we just do you want to outro that with the
Yeah.
federal agents mad because I'm flagrant?
Yeah.
Right.
Tap the cell and the phone in the
Yes.
basement. My team supreme, stay clean, triple beam, lyrical dream. I be that cat you see at all
Oh
events.
yes.
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 Oh, that was
Yeah.
great. I try to be more like a P. Diddy though.
Oh yeah?
Like I try to be puffy. Like I'm in the background. Like I actually just was texting my group chat of guys. Like I have these dudes that I'm really close with. We call ourselves the Brown Boys because we're all
Right,
brown
there you go.
in some
Yep.
variety. Yeah, and I want to be like the Dr. Dre of church.
Oh,
Like that's the goal,
yeah.
is to be like, maybe not the best rapper. Like maybe that's not the thing, but I'd like to produce so that the Super Bowl halftime show is all amazing songs that I was connected
Yeah.
to in some way.
Do you have who is the mace of your Brown Boys group?
Ooh, who is the mace of
Yeah,
our crew?
who's the mace of your group?
Oh, I'm gonna have to think
Okay,
about that
cool.
one. Oh, probably Robbie. Probably Robbie Q.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, no,
Robert
Robbie,
Quintero. Not that you know
I
who
don't,
this is. Robbie
yeah.
will listen though. Robbie will listen. Robbie might be the mace because I mean he came out just like boom and blew it
Yeah.
up and was just right on there. And now he's kind of in the period of like maybe he's gonna come back
Yeah.
later.
Yep.
and
That's
do that
perfect.
piece.
Yeah, that's the mace. That's definitely
Yeah.
the mace of your crew. Yeah.
Um,
All my kids
yeah,
are
shout out to
Skilo.
Lee.
That's what they love. They just
I wish I
yes,
was a
they
little
love
bit
that
taller.
song. They're like,
I wish
"Ooh,
I
I
was
feel
a
that."
baller.
They've like all like pre-puberty, like ready to like, ready to to drive those Impalas around, but not yet. Still too little.
As one does. As one does
obviously.
in North Carolina. Yeah. Are you tall?
No,
How tall are you?
5'5".
Can I guess how tall you are?
Yeah, 5'5".
Okay, no, that's okay. I'm just guessing. Okay.
Yeah.
And so your kids are maybe, you think they're going to be tall, short?
One is already taller. The 13-year-old's already taller than me. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's a
It
problem.
is a very strange feeling. I do not recommend it. It is if against nature, as Paul would say in Romans. Contra nature. Something is wrong with the order of the universe.
I hope you told them that. Just be like, the Apostle Paul forbids you to grow taller than me because it is against nature.
And my 13-year-old just rolls her eyes and, walks out of the room to go do whatever. But yeah.
13-year-olds just roll their eyes at everything. Like, I don't know that it was even specific.
It's like, how is there not like retinal damage, like from all the eye rolling? Like, I know. Like, whoa, that's gotta hurt. Whoa, that's gotta hurt at this point. But
Liz Lemon level eye rolls.
Oh, amazing stuff.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, thank you for joining our rap and height discussion hour. People will find you on Instagram. They'll buy your book, How to Have an Enemy. Please buy that. And then you have another book too. What's it called?
Fire by Night, Finding God in the Pages of the Old Testament. Yep.
Ooh, come on. Good. Fire by Night. Buy it. All right. Hey, Melissa, thank you for taking the time to be here and hang out with me. I really appreciate you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Check out Melissa. She's fantastic. Hopefully this is a stimulating and fun conversation for you. Love y'all. That was a super conversation with Melissa Florer-Bixler, or the Notorious MFB, as we may call her now going forward. She just had some outstanding things to say that really challenged a lot of what I've been doing and a lot of the beliefs that I have. But what's really great about what she talked about, both interrogation and imagination, are the keys to kind of leading the church toward a better tomorrow, a better future, one where we can fully invest in people and care for people and not be a part of dehumanizing structures as they do that. I'm just thankful for her expertise, her humor. So thank you, Melissa, for being here. I hope you enjoyed it as well. You can find her all over the interwebs, Melissa Florer-Bixler, and it's melissaflorerbixler.com if you want more information. She's got a book, How to Have an Enemy. It is a great book that I haven't read yet, but I need to start doing that right now because I've loved everything else she's written and her articles. Find her on all the social medias that way as well. Yo, this podcast is great, but it's nothing without you. Thank you for being a part of this community. If you haven't yet, click the subscribe button wherever you're watching or listening to this. You can ask questions, email me at john@betterontheinside.com, or you can find me on socials. I'm at Twitter at John Pyle, JONPYLE. And please feel free to ask those questions. I'd love to answer more questions on episodes and talk to y'all more about what you're looking forward to. Because again, this is about creating cultures that are better on the inside. People are not expendable. Period. People are not expendable. We have some more cool episodes coming up. Thank you for being a part of this. This has been produced by City Church, San Antonio, the church that I work at, as well as the Church Digital Network, an awesome group of people that are doing some amazing stuff. All right. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.